Hi, I'm the woman who won $433 million and told no one. You'd think money would bring peace, but in my house, it brought cruelty. My sister called me useless, my father erased my name from his will, and the family I loved turned me into a joke. So, I faked being broke just to see who'd still stand beside me. Only my grandfather did, and what he left me changed everything. But not before the truth tore us all apart. I drove past the edge of town just as the clouds folded in over the hills. The gas station still had the same cracked sign. The bakery, same faded awning. Everything looked untouched, but I wasn't the same woman who left. I'd gone quiet for months, off the radar, and nobody called to check. Not once. There was a winning ticket folded inside my wallet, $433 million. I hadn't told a soul. Not because I didn't want to share, but because I already knew how they'd treat me if they thought I had nothing. They only saw me when they needed something. The thought hit like an old bruise when I passed the old high school. I parked the car half a mile down the road, a new model, sleek and too obvious. Would have raised questions. I walked the rest of the way, the wind tugging at my coat as the sky turned a deeper gray. The farmhouse hadn't changed. Paint peeling at the corners, porch light flickering like always. I stood at the gate a moment longer than I needed to, wondering if I was really ready for this. Inside, they were already gathered. The kind of noise only my family could make, loud laughter, chairs scraping against the floor, silverware clinking like wind chimes in a storm. I opened the door myself. No one noticed. Look who finally made it, Aunt Lorraine muttered over her shoulder. No hug, no smile. I hovered awkwardly near the entrance until someone, one of the cousins, sat right in the only open chair at the table. He didn't look up. No one told him to move. I leaned against the wall, offered to help with drinks. My voice barely carried over the din. No one responded. They passed mashed potatoes and stories, job promotions, vacations, baby names. Not one question about where I'd been. Then came the punchline. Jimmy, the cousin with the biggest mouth and smallest spine, grinned as he leaned back in his chair. Remember when Maddie tried to sell handmade candles? Said it'd pay her rent. Laughter erupted like they'd rehearsed it. I didn't laugh. They don't even realize I'm bleeding inside. I excused myself before the main course, retreated to the hallway, and stared at the old family photos. My face was in some of them, but never at the center. That's when the memory came back. My 17th birthday. I'd spent weeks saving up for a sweater to gift Mom. 2 weeks later, I saw her give it to my cousin Ellie. No tag, no explanation, just passed along like a used dish towel. That was the day I stopped trying. I stepped out onto the porch for air, and there he was, Grandpa Bill. Quiet, leaning on his cane, watching the storm build in the distance. They don't deserve your light, he said before I even sat down. I swallowed hard. He always knew when something was off. I'm fine, I lied. He didn't believe me. You were always the one with too much heart and not enough armor. I blinked fast to keep it together. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather journal, handed it to me. Write the truth you can't say, he said. I did. Saved me. He didn't ask about the ticket. But I think he knew. Back inside, I slipped into the downstairs bathroom and locked the door. My hands trembled as I leaned on the sink. The mirror reflected a stranger with tired eyes and a clenched jaw. I opened my wallet and pulled it out again, the ticket. Numbers bold, official, proof. And they still think I'm broke. A tear threatened, but I bit it back. Let's see what they do when they think I have nothing left. When I stepped out, dessert had already started. No one noticed I'd been gone. Someone asked if I needed a ride back to the bus stop. I smiled. Nah, I'll catch the late one. They nodded. No questions. In that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wouldn't say a word. I'd play the part. I'd let them think I had nothing, needed everything. Because if someone chose to show up for me now, without knowing what I had tucked in my wallet, that meant it was real. The real test would begin tomorrow. I'd fake being broke, and wait. I woke up to a shaft of light slipping through the curtains, dust dancing in it like secrets too old to name. The quiet was heavy in that little cabin I'd rented, bare bones, creaky floorboards, no TV. Just enough space for one person trying not to be noticed. I stayed still for a moment, feeling the ache behind my eyes from pretending so hard the night before. The laughter, the empty chair, the silence when I spoke. But my plan was clear: play the part, and see who shows up without a script. I grabbed the journal Grandpa gave me, ran my fingers over the cracked leather cover, and wrote, "Silence is the sharpest truth." That's what he said last night. And he was right. I called into work, told them money was tight, I couldn't make the commute. They bought it. Of course they did. Before noon, I packed a small bag, some designer clothes I hadn't even worn, and dropped them at the town's thrift store. The woman behind the counter gave me a sympathetic look I didn't deserve. I nodded like I was embarrassed. That part came easy. Then I logged into my insurance app and paused the coverage on my real car. For the next few weeks, the bus would be my ride. Old, loud, and late. But it fit the image I needed them to see. Funny thing. When you look tired and poor, people avoid eye contact more. Like poverty might be contagious. I hadn't even hit rock bottom, but the world was already stepping over me. At the corner cafe, I ran into Emmerich. My brother. He had that same stressed look, always biting at the inside of his cheek. He was scrolling through something on his phone, barely glanced up when I said hi. "You hear what Mom said about the will?" he grunted, still looking at the screen. "No, haven't talked to her," I said. "Things are rough right now. Rent's overdue. Might be moving out." He nodded like I'd said something about the weather. "Yeah, I know the feeling. Gas just keeps going up." And that was that. No offer to help. Not even a, "Let me know if you need anything." By the time I stepped back onto the sidewalk, I felt smaller than ever. This test. It wasn't going to be a game. It was going to be a slow kind of loneliness. One that stretched out longer than I'd expected. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Colby's Books and Gifts. It was the kind of shop that smelled like dust and vanilla, run by the same family for years. 2 years ago, they were weeks from shutting down. I'd paid off their lease anonymously. Now, just inside the door, a framed article hung on the wall. Carrie Lavy's generous heart saves local business. I blinked at it. My sister's picture smiled back at me under the headline. The owner, sweet old Mrs. Colby, came over. "You must be proud," she said. "Your sister such a blessing. If it weren't for her." I forced a smile and nodded. But something inside me turned cold. I remembered writing the check. I remembered signing it with a fake name. Carrie didn't know. No one did. Or so I thought. Even my silence was stolen from me. I walked out before I could say something I'd regret. Outside, I let the wind hit my face hard enough to sting. It helped. Later, I pretended my car had broken down just outside of town. Parked it right where the gravel shoulder met the trees, hood popped like it was overheating. Didn't take long. Hal, the old mechanic, pulled over in his rusted truck. Didn't ask for a story, didn't ask for a name. "Need a hand?" I nodded. He worked quietly. Just checked a few things, tightened a hose that didn't really need it. "Should get you back on the road," he said. "No charge." I opened my mouth to explain, to offer something, anything, but he shook his head. "You can tell who's good by how they treat you when you have nothing," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I watched him drive away and sat in the front seat a while, not starting the engine. Just thinking. That night, I met Grandpa at the diner. He always picked the booth near the window, even if the view was just a parking lot. He didn't ask questions, just slid over a slice of pie and said, "You look like someone who saw too much in one day." I laughed, but it came out flat. "You can't test people hoping they'll pass," he said, pouring sugar into his coffee. "You test them to see the truth." I started to tell him about Carrie. The article. The lie. But he raised his hand. "Don't waste words proving what time will show." We talked about small things after that. Old arguments in the family. The time Aunt Lorraine threw out his favorite fishing rod because it smelled like lake. He chuckled, but his eyes stayed sharp, watching me. "I've been watching too," he said finally. "Longer than you think." When I got back to the cabin, I didn't turn on any lights. Just sat in the quiet. I opened the journal. Kindness from strangers. Silence from blood. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. I folded the mechanic's receipt and tucked it into the back of the journal. A small thing, but it meant more than anything I'd heard from my own family. And then it hit me. Maybe I didn't fake being broke. Maybe they faked being family. I walked into the grocery store expecting nothing more than stale bread and canned soup. The fluorescent lights flickered above. I paused at the produce aisle. A familiar scene, I had been here countless times. But this time it felt different, hollow. I could feel their eyes already. I saw Mom and my sister Maribel standing near the checkout. Their smiles were polite, thin, manufactured. "Hey, you made it," Mom called across the rows. "We were worried you might not come at all after last night." Maribel stepped forward. "You stormed out, Rowena. Everyone saw you leave before dinner was over." I froze. The story I knew didn't have a storm. Just quiet exit. Emmerich had brought it up earlier. He said I made a scene. I said nothing. Now here they were repeating it like gospel. Someone nearby nodded at me as though I was fragile. As though I was broken. My voice caught. "That's not how it happened," I said. They shook their heads. "We're just trying to help," Mom replied softly, her tone like a shield. I felt the line between truth and their version blur. I realized then, when lies are repeated with enough confidence, even the truth doubts itself. I backed into the frozen food section, trying not to draw attention. I opened the door to a freezer and pressed my palm against the glass. The cold stung. Which was better, freezing out or being invisible? Both felt like punishment. I left my cart and walked out. The checkout clerk gave me a sympathetic glance, a pity look I didn't ask for. Outside, cars passed and the sky was empty. I let the tears come quietly. Not loud, just steady. It felt stronger that way. Back at the cabin, the scene replayed in my mind. Did I raise my voice? Did I storm out? I pulled the journal from my bag and flipped to last week's entry. It said, "I left quietly so no one would know I was gone." That confession burned now. The phone buzzed. Grandpa Vernon calling. I thought of brushing off the moment, but I answered. "You okay?" he asked. He didn't push. His voice steady. "Not really," I said softly. "Don't let someone else's voice narrate your story," he told me. And I realized it wasn't about miscommunication anymore. It was about erasure. Later that evening, a message from Emmerich lit my screen. "Families getting together to talk. Just want to help you through whatever you're going through." I stared at it. It wasn't support, it was setup. A staged intervention disguised as care. I recalled every time their concern, masked control. "We're worried about you, maybe you should get help." They built a house of mirrors where I was the only one not reflecting. I didn't respond. "I won't show up, but I'll watch." As night fell, I installed the small camera on the porch, quiet click in the darkness. I bought a voice recorder. I logged onto the forum about emotional abuse and gaslighting. I wrote inside my journal, "Kindness from strangers. Silence from blood. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits." My wrist felt empty. I dug into the drawer and found the silver bracelet Grandpa gave me at 12. The one engraved, "Truth is quiet but unbreakable." I slipped it on. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. The countdown had begun. The invitation arrived in golden script, addressed in someone else's name. I tucked it into my coat pocket the morning the leaves changed color. When I pulled into the estate driveway later that evening, the lights were already stringing over the garden patio, caterers pacing beneath lanterns. I parked behind the hedge, stepping out in a simple dress, nothing new, nothing flashy. I didn't want attention, only observation. Inside, the estate was humming with courtesy and applause. The pictures of Maribel, large and proud, hung on the walls. Her face smiled down at me from every corner. Emmerich greeted me with a hug the moment I stepped through the door. "Glad you made the effort," he said, then turned away. I carried a tray of appetizers past the guests, noticing the corner seat reserved for me, behind potted palms, beside the service door. I sat there, quiet. It struck me. They told me I was family, but the table arrangement spoke otherwise. On the patio screen they played a video, Lavie Family Achievements. Maribel's name glowed. Emmerich's giggled. My face flicked past, unnamed, unspoiled by recognition. A cousin leaned in. "Wow, Maribel saved the company." I clutched my wine glass so tightly it burned my palm. The bronze plaque read, "Knox Lavie Legacy." My surname left off. My hours, my ideas, erased without a word. I placed the quiet power scarf Grandpa gave me around my neck. It sat like armor. Then the car. Velvet box. Silver key. Maribel stepped forward, thanked our parents for this special gift to bail her out. My stomach dropped. This was the rolls I'd bought for Grandpa, parked at his house. I cleared my throat. That's generous. But I didn't realize it came from the gift I gave last week. Maribel laughed. Oh, Rowena, he got it from me as a family reward. Guests chuckled. My heat rosé. I excused myself to the restroom and let the tear linger only long enough to taste the salt. I wasn't broke tonight. I was watching. Outside, the driveway gate refused to unlock. The gardener saw me fumbling and offered to walk me to the front gate. No cameras, no praise, just a man doing a small kindness. I remembered Hal's words, kindness reveals character, not wealth. Inside, they built a performance. Tonight someone else stood in the spotlight made from the foundation I laid. Perfect. Back on the patio, I drifted to the corner seat. The swag of lights, laughter trailing like confetti, all around. I placed the silk scarf next to the unused velvet box. Grandpa approached, no words. His nod said everything. Maribel came over to hug him. I moved away. She glanced at me, half smile. I picked the garden bench under the maples and watched the lights go dim. Some applause is hollow, I thought. Some silence is real. Tomorrow they'll see me broke. But when I reveal myself, I'll be whole. The engine coughed as I rolled into Hal's garage, that old rental groaning like it knew it was part of the performance. The place smelled like oil, dust, and winter, felt honest in a way the estate never did. Hal glanced up from under a hood, squinted at me, and said, "You're driving this like you're hiding something real big." I didn't answer. I just smiled like I didn't know what he meant. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I checked it out of habit. Emmerich. Proof of funds, the text said. That car wasn't a gift. Need documentation by end of day. So that's how it was. They weren't just writing me out, they were rewriting the story. Treating me like a liability they hadn't fully erased yet. Inside, while I waited, I wandered past the customer counter. There was a photo on the wall. Family charity event from years back, Maribel and Emmerich front and center, glossy smiles. My face had been cropped out. Not just forgotten, intentionally excluded. I leaned against the window, watching the sun start to fall. I'll play broke tonight, I told myself. But I'm paying attention now. As I stepped outside into the crisp evening, Emmerich was waiting for me. Hands in his coat pockets, leaning against his car like he had all the time in the world. That vehicle, he said, voice low but sharp. It didn't come from nowhere. Receipts. I didn't flinch. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Just looked at him like he was a stranger talking nonsense. I'll have the board look into it, he added, then walked off before I could say a word. Like he owned the sidewalk, the company, the truth. I stood there alone, wind picking up, dusk settling in. My fingers curled around the cold keys in my pocket. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small, I felt focused. Later that week, I took a quiet lunch at a downtown spot near the corporate offices. I wasn't on the calendar, wasn't expected. Wore a blazer from a thrift store and tucked my hair into a loose bun. No one looked twice. I sat 2 tables down from Callum Bragg and Emmerich, their voices just clear enough. They still haven't caught on she's a shareholder, Callum said, sipping his drink. Emmerich laughed. Silent shares. She doesn't even know what she owns. I didn't move, didn't react. I just listened as they discussed leveraging part of the family trust to back a merger, using assets that included mine. My name, my inheritance, my silence. That night, in my journal, I wrote one line over and over again. They used my name like a pawn but counted me as 0. After dark, I drove to my grandfather's house. He was in his study, warm lamplight casting soft shadows across the oak bookshelves. We didn't hug. That wasn't our language. But he poured me tea and handed me a manila envelope. The invoice, he said. I bought the car myself. Transferred everything into my name after I saw what they were circling. He slid the paper across the desk like a dealer in a high-stakes game. You're not broke, he said. You're invisible. Big difference. I looked at the timeline we'd mapped out together. Dates, names, weak spots in their schemes. What scares them most? I asked him. When you stop playing the game their way, he said without pause. Driving back to the cabin that night, headlights barely cutting through the mist, I felt it shift. The first real step. Not rage, not revenge, just readiness. At the kitchen table, I opened my laptop. Typed out a formal letter to the board of the Lavi Company. Subject: Notice of Contribution and Discrepancy. I was an uncredited contributor for over 10 years. Attached are records and conversations confirming my role. I included Hal's invoice, notes from my journal, and a few carefully clipped email chains. Last line. Consider this my formal notification. I'm no longer off the books. I clicked send at midnight. Closed the laptop. Sat back. I was still broke in their eyes. But tomorrow, they'd know that silence was never weakness. It was the setup. I pulled into the company lot just after sunrise. The cold light skimmed the tops of Mercedes, Audis, black Escalades with their tinted windows. My rental wheezed into the far row like it didn't belong. Fitting. I stepped out slowly, took in the breath of winter air, the thin frost on the concrete. My phone buzzed. A text from Grandpa. Trust your instincts today. That was it. No fluff. Just exactly what I needed. I looked at the entrance, towering steel and spotless glass. The scarf around my neck, gray wool, a little frayed, quiet, was the same one he gave me that night in the study when I told him I wasn't playing their game anymore. I touched it once, then headed inside. Every step echoed. They thought I was just the broke granddaughter. Let them. I liked being underestimated. The boardroom smelled of cologne and expensive tension. Maribel's heels clicked against the floor as she greeted people like she owned the place. Emmerich nodded at a few executives, eyes sliding past me like I was a ghost. Then Grandpa walked in. You could have heard a pen drop. He hadn't been to a meeting in 10 years, by choice. But there he was, sharp suit, silver hair slicked back, cane tapping slow and steady. He moved to the head of the table and spoke like he never left. There's a proposal you haven't seen yet, he said. Everyone turned, confused, curious, slightly annoyed. He came to me, handed over a sealed folder. No eye rolls, no explanation, just leaned in close and whispered, when you're ready. Then he left. I didn't open the folder. Not then, not in front of them. I watched the room instead, how they looked at me now. Confused, unsettled, some with a pinch of contempt. They knew something shifted. So did I. That afternoon, they threw a celebration in the downstairs lounge. Legacy Trust Reveal, they called it. Fancy hors d'oeuvres, champagne flutes, polished speeches. Grandpa was nowhere in sight. A slideshow played on loop. Pictures of the family through the decades. At the end, the big reveal. Names of the new trustees. Emmerich, Maribel, cousins I hadn't seen since high school. Mine wasn't there. I stood at the edge of the room, watching my name not appear, again and again. Maribel caught my eye and smiled like she'd won a prize. You know how these things work, Rowan. It's not personal. I raised my glass, sipped slowly. Everything's personal. You just don't want to admit it. I stepped outside after that. The cold slapped me awake, but it was clean. Honest. Inside, they toasted to unity. Outside, I made a decision. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something far more permanent. After dinner, I drove to the estate. The library still had that old book smell that reminded me of snow days and Grandpa's voice reading ancient war stories. He sat waiting, fireplace low, folder open on the table. His will. My name was in it, but not front and center. Contingency beneficiary. Only activated if certain funds were mishandled. Smart. You planned this, I said, no accusation, just realization. He didn't deny it. You don't yell in a storm. You anchor down and wait. I nodded. They think I'm out. They think too fast, he replied. I stayed there a while, going through the documents, mapping the angles. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about timing, leverage. When I got back to the cabin, it was nearly midnight. I didn't turn on the lights. I pulled out the journal, my record since that first dinner. I flipped through. The failed test, the stolen gift, that fake sympathy. Tonight, the omission. I started sketching out the next step. Quietly. An anonymous account. Data backups. Timeline revisions. I wasn't making noise, I was building evidence. I paused, opened the small drawer, pulled out the bracelet Grandpa gave me when I turned 25. Silver. Inscribed. Truth is quiet but unbreakable. I set it next to the journal. Then I sat back. No storms coming. I am the storm. The next morning, I walked into the same boardroom that had once felt miles above me. Now, it just felt small. Claustrophobic. I had Vernon's folder under my arm, a USB in my pocket, and a calmness that came from knowing I had nothing left to lose. Emmerich and Maribel were already seated, legs crossed, half smirking. They barely acknowledged me. I didn't sit. I reached into my pocket, set the USB on the center of the polished oak table, and plugged it into the boardroom screen. This isn't about inheritance. It's about truth. Their smirks faded. The first recording played, my father, half drunk at last year's gala, saying, "She just doesn't have the instincts for this. She's better off quiet." Then Maribel's voice, clearer, "Thanks for being the silent one." It made things smoother. The room went dead still. A few board members shifted in their seats. One executive actually dropped his phone. No one laughed. I let the silence linger. Let them feel it. I watched their eyes dart between each other. Who knew what? Who had gone along with it? I thought to myself, they rewrote the story. Now they get to live in the version I'm writing. Maribel stood up fast. This is petty. Emotional revenge doesn't belong here. I looked at her without blinking. You should sit. We're not done. The next clip rolled. It wasn't audio. It was financial data. I saw Emmerich's jaw tense. I turned off the screen. Outside, I stepped onto the terrace. The cold hit hard, but I welcomed it. I sipped tea from my flask, stared out at the bare trees, and listened to the muffled chaos inside. Raised voices, a chair scraping, someone knocking over a glass. They weren't relieved. They were shaken. I took that in. They thought silence was weakness. But silence, when aimed right, is a weapon. By mid-afternoon, they were scrambling. I went back to the cabin, set Vernon's folder on the desk, and opened my laptop. The documents in that folder weren't just ceremonial. They were proof of Emmerich's using family funds as personal leverage in a failed acquisition. Maribel had rerouted a luxury car gift through a company loan and put it in my name without my consent. I drafted an anonymous email. Subject line, trust misconduct. Body, please review the transaction dated the 3rd of November 2024. Beneficiary listed was silent, not absent. I hit send. To every major shareholder. With attached documentation. No signature. I remembered what Hal told me the day he handed me my repaired car. You don't fix the damage from the roof down. Start with the base. Let them keep thinking I was broke, irrelevant, powerless. Every brick they used to build this fortress? It came from my silence. But they never asked if I was done being quiet. Around 10 that night, I got a message from Maribel. You're dragging the family down. We can write this off. Walk away. Attached was a fake invoice. The car gift had been filed as a company loan. With interest. In my name. They weren't trying to win anymore. They were trying to bury me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered, they really think I'm still that girl. I stood by the window, snow falling soft and constant. I pulled out my journal. The old one. The one with Eleanor Roosevelt quotes scribbled in the margins. I opened to a blank page. Wrote, they turned debt into chains. I turned silence into strategy. I wrote for an hour. Not just memories, steps. Moves. Names. Then I shut it. The next morning, I called Vernon. It's time, I said. He didn't ask for details. He just said, you hold the pen now. That was enough. I packed the bracelet. The silver one with the words etched deep. Truth is quiet but unbreakable. I opened a secure channel, used an old pseudonym, and sent a tip to the press. Lavie Trust. Internal review advised. Names attached. I didn't watch for a reply. Instead, I drove to the edge of the estate, parked where the trees gave me a view of the house. Snow covered the driveway. The lights were on in the east wing. I caught my reflection in the rearview. Still me, but steadier now. They think I'm broke. Tomorrow, they'll learn the cost of forgetting who I am. I woke up to birdsong instead of phone alerts. The silence felt earned. The driveway outside my cabin showed no black sedans, no harsh mirrors of what had been. The Lavie family trust was under investigation. Emmerich and Maribel had both stepped down. Months had passed since the confrontation. The estate in Ohio felt quieter from where I stood, simpler. Grandpa's final clause, made official after his passing, placed me in control. I opened the mailbox this morning and found a small brown envelope, his handwriting. I paused, felt both loss and gratitude at once. I traced the ink slowly. He must have written this weeks ago. I sat on the porch with it in my lap, sun low, air crisp. The fight had ended, but the peace was just beginning. Inside the envelope was a letter. Grandpa Vernon admitted something I wasn't expecting. He had once doubted me. Pressured by family pride, by tradition, by old money, voices that hissed louder than the ones I heard. He wrote, "Silence can break chains or forge them, depends on who's holding the hammer." He explained how he let the betrayal play out, believing collapse would force rebirth. I read that and felt a strange weight lift off my chest, because anger is easier than understanding, but neither builds legacy. I cried, not from hurt, but recognition. He gave me the tools to build something different. At the bottom of the letter he wrote, "Now speak, not to avenge, but to rebuild." I whispered softly, "I will." A few days later I drove to the cemetery near the estate. A light drizzle fell. I carried white lilies, placed them on Grandpa's grave, and beside them the silver bracelet he had given me, etched, "Truth is quiet but unbreakable." Across the row, Maribel stood a few yards away. Her head bowed, coat wrapped tight. No words passed between us, only a nod. The truce was fragile. I sensed she carried her guilt not like a punishment but like a quiet truth now, less sharp, more human. I watched the wind lift petals from the mound and realized forgiveness wasn't about her. It was for me, so I could stop reacting and start living. Weeks later I recorded a video message for the community and shareholders. "I'm not here to defend the Lavie name," I said, "I'm here to redefine it." I described the foundation I was creating in Grandpa's honor: scholarships for underprivileged girls in Ohio, leadership programs, public transparency. I quoted Maya Angelou, "I can be changed by what happens to me. But I refuse to be reduced by it." The audience reaction was steady, comments from older viewers about hope, about healing, about justice. I ended, "The money was never the miracle. Finding my voice was." The video quietly trended. I felt recognition, not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. That night I brewed tea in my cabin, opened the journal that had begun all of this. I flipped to the last page and wrote, "I was never broke, only waiting for my value to show." Outside, moonlight laid silver across melting snow, the field peaceful. I heard Grandpa's voice inside me, "You hold the pen now." The girl who once thought her strength lay in hiding it now sat calm, whole. The story ended, but the woman remained. Ready. I woke up to birdsong instead of phone alerts. The silence felt earned. The driveway outside my cabin showed no black sedans, no harsh mirrors of what had been. The Lavie family trust was under investigation. Emmerich and Maribel had both stepped down. Months had passed since the confrontation. The estate in Ohio felt quieter from where I stood, simpler. Grandpa's final clause, made official after his passing, placed me in control. I opened the mailbox this morning and found a small brown envelope, his handwriting. I paused, felt both loss and gratitude at once. I traced the ink slowly. He must have written this weeks ago. I sat on the porch with it in my lap, sun low, air crisp. The fight had ended, but the peace was just beginning. Inside the envelope was a letter. Grandpa Vernon admitted something I wasn't expecting. He had once doubted me. Pressured by family pride, by tradition, by old money, voices that hissed louder than the ones I heard. He wrote, "Silence can break chains or forge them, depends on who's holding the hammer." He explained how he let the betrayal play out, believing collapse would force rebirth. I read that and felt a strange weight lift off my chest, because anger is easier than understanding, but neither builds legacy. I cried, not from hurt, but recognition. He gave me the tools to build something different. At the bottom of the letter he wrote, "Now speak, not to avenge, but to rebuild." I whispered softly, "I will." A few days later I drove to the cemetery near the estate. A light drizzle fell. I carried white lilies, placed them on Grandpa's grave, and beside them the silver bracelet he had given me, etched, Truth is quiet but unbreakable. Across the row, Maribel stood a few yards away. Her head bowed, coat wrapped tight. No words passed between us, only a nod. The truce was fragile. I sensed she carried her guilt not like a punishment but like a quiet truth now, less sharp, more human. I watched the wind lift petals from the mound and realized forgiveness wasn't about her. It was for me, so I could stop reacting and start living. Weeks later, I recorded a video message for the community and shareholders. I'm not here to defend the Lavi name, I said, I'm here to redefine it. I described the foundation I was creating in Grandpa's honor: scholarships for underprivileged girls in Ohio, leadership programs, public transparency. I quoted Maya Angelou, I can be changed by what happens to me. But I refuse to be reduced by it. The audience reaction was steady, comments from older viewers about hope, about healing, about justice. I ended, the money was never the miracle. Finding my voice was. The video quietly trended. I felt recognition, not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. That night I brewed tea in my cabin, opened the journal that had begun all of this. I flipped to the last page and wrote, I was never broke, only waiting for my value to show. Outside, moonlight laid silver across melting snow, the field peaceful. I heard Grandpa's voice inside me, you hold the pen now. The girl who once thought her strength lay in hiding it now sat calm, whole. The story ended, but the woman remained. Ready.